just months before the 2024 election, Donald Trump has finally admitted that he did, in fact, lose the 2020 race to now President Joe Biden.
I became president. Then the second time, I got millions more votes than I got the first time. So I was told if I got 63 million, which is what I got the first time, you would win. You can't not win. And I got millions of more votes than that, and lost by a whisker.
Lost by a whisker. We should note, of course, that Donald Trump's lies about the 2020 election fueled the January 6th attack on the Capitol, as well as multiple state and federal indictments. Joining us now, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker. Peter, always good to see you. So what do we make of this? Is this, I assume this was more of a slip of the tongue, and I doubt that Donald Trump is suddenly going to talk day in and day out about how he lost last time around. But also the fact that he's still obsessing about the 2020 election. Talk to us about the worries that some Republicans have that is going to turn off that thin slice of those undecided voters, those wobbly voters that he really needs to win this time around.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, John, that it's probably a slip of the tongue. He hasn't suddenly come forward and acknowledged that this whole thing for 4 years, almost 4 years, has been a big, the big lie, to use a phrase I've read before. And I think that, but it reveals in some ways, perhaps, that he knows what it has been. That's the thing. It's always been a really interesting debate, right? Does he know it's a lie and he propagates it anyway, or does he live under some sort of a different reality in which he actually believes that he that he won the election, it was stolen from him, even though there's zero evidence of that, and every body that has investigated it says it's not true. And it's really fascinating and kind of important. Do you want a president who lives in the world of reality, or who traffics in brazen lies, knowing that they're lies? He was told time and time again in 2020, after the election, that he had lost, that there were no, in fact, evidence of massive fraud that would have changed the results. He says lost by a whisker. It's worth remembering it was 7 million votes nationally in the popular vote. It was much closer in a handful of battleground states, had tens of thousands of votes change in those specific states in those specific ways that could have flipped the election. And so in that sense, it was a close election. But you're right. I think a lot of Republicans want him to move on, and they don't want 2024 to be about 2020, because most voters don't want 2024 to be about 2020. They want it to be about 2024 and the years to come. There's a lot of important issues on the table.
Yeah, precisely right. And we shouldn't be holding our breath for a delayed Donald Trump concession speech. Let's talk about the debate. Assuming the last few details are ironed out, it is less than a week away. It's this coming Tuesday in Philadelphia. What do we know of how the two candidates are preparing?
Yeah, this is going to be a fascinating moment, perhaps the biggest moment we have left in the 60-some days until the election, a moment when tens of millions of people will be watching. So it's critical, I think, for both of these candidates. They're already playing the expectation game. Obviously, the last debate went badly for the Democrats, but resulted in a change in Canada that's gone well for them. They want to see Kamala Harris prove herself on a national stage, that she can stand up to Donald Trump, who's a big physical and metaphorical and political force. He is, he has a way of running roughshod over debate opponents, as we've seen over the last 8 years. Sometimes that has bounced against him, as it did against President Biden, then former Vice President Biden in the first debate in 2020. So both candidates, I think, are getting ready to try to find a way to get under the other one's skin. For Trump, it's most important to try to stop Kamala Harris's momentum. She has had a pretty good debut, and the question is, can she then now translate that into something more meaningful and sustained?
Yeah, the Harris team saying that she'll kind of camp out in the Pittsburgh area this coming weekend, both campaigning and doing debate prep ahead of the debate itself. And Peter, lastly, just talk to us about the dynamic of Harris as that former prosecutor, standing across the stage from a convicted felon. How much do you think she'll lean into that dynamic?
Oh, I think you'll hear that a lot, certainly from her campaign, almost certainly from her as well. It's a comparison they like. It's clean and relatively simple and easy to explain. It doesn't mean that Trump voters who think that the prosecutions against him have been illegitimate will change their mind, but it's aimed at those voters who don't like Trump but aren't necessarily sure yet about Kamala Harris. And so she's going to take that prosecutorial, instinct that she has. She's demonstrated it when she was a senator at hearings, and she's going to, no doubt, try to grill him about issues like this, and it'll be fascinating to watch.
chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Peter Baker, thank you as always. We'll talk to you again shortly on Morning Joe.